I'm going to do a couple part series about why visceral fat is so hard to lose when you are working in executive or senior leadership roles because of the amount of stress that is put on your body during that time. So part one of this video is going to be why visceral fat is so hard to burn and how to actually do it. The number one visceral fat mistake that I see women in their 30s and 40s in executive roles make, and it's something that isn't really spoken about on YouTube, because most advice out there is talking about what to eat and how to exercise, but none of that will work if you don't first tackle the one thing that's going to make the real change. So stay tuned. So this is the main reason why the conventional methods fail in executive roles, and it's mainly because you have to think of visceral fat as something different from the rest of the fat in your body, differently from subcutaneous fat. Your visceral fat is metabolically active, and what that means is it will respond to lots of different environmental factors more so than your subcutaneous fat, which is why it's so much harder to lose, and we're going to get into that as we go on. But the executive reality, and the thing that is going to occur with most people working 60+ hour weeks in kind of a desk-based setting, is we have chronic high stress, poor or bad quality sleep, low functional muscle mass, alcohol intake, which can sometimes be excessive, and low physical activity and low non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Because all those things exist in an executive person, it means that the calorie deficit and the high intensity interval cardio, which is pushed so much online, and a lot of these YouTube videos that I'm watching will not work. Aggressive, harsh calorie deficits is just going to further signal the body to store even more fat internally because it's in such a stressful situation, and the high intensity interval training will add to that stress, add to that information. So the verdict is that the eat less and move more protocols often make visceral fat worse, especially in women in these environments. Some common pitfalls that I see as a DEXA scan consultant myself, based off of thousands of DEXA scans I performed with multiple scans, including people in high executive performing roles, entrepreneurs and CEOs. And the 5 biggest mistakes I see from this sort of demographic after they've come back in for a follow-up scan and the visceral fat has either stayed the same or got worse is that like I said already, the calorie deficit was too harsh, which causes a cortisol spike. They have lost muscle mass, and if you have less muscle, it means your insulin sensitivity is lower, and there's less kind of glucose disposal in your muscles, which means your glucose kind of goes around to your central fat storage. Doing it exclusively HIIT, like I just said, cutting carbohydrates completely, it will impact your recovery mainly, and that's the main reason why things like your sleep will get worse and then your cortisol will spike even again in the morning. And long duration fasting, doing 24-hour, 48-hour fasts will increase the muscle, the kind of muscle that is lost in your sleep. Just a quick understanding of visceral fat, if you are not sure what it is we're talking about, is the fat around your organs. So it's not stuff that you can kind of pinch, feel and see around your skin. It is deep underneath your first layer of fat and around that layer of muscle around your organs. And like I said, it's metabolically active, and it acts as an endocrine organ, releasing cytokines and hormones that drive inflammation. The primary health risks that come with increased visceral fat are cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver and metabolic syndrome, and also can lead to cognitive decline and neuroinflammation as well. And like I said as well, it's invisible. You cannot see it or feel it. And a lot of individuals who are thin or look fine on the outside might actually have very raised visceral fat. And I thought I'd just give you a very interesting case study looking at myself versus my sister. So me and my sister weigh pretty much the exact same, around the 60 kilo mark. This is one of my scans back in 2024, and this was her very recently. As you can see, we both have the same body fat percentage in these scans, 31%. We weigh the same. we have a very, very similar ratio of android fat to gyno fat, so fat around your hips and thighs, which means that we both store fat genetically around our hips and thighs at the same ratio of around 0.7. But interestingly enough, my visceral fat was 35 centimetres squared, but my sister's was 121 centimetres squared. Anything over 100 kind of puts you into that increased risk range. And why so? If we store fat the same way, with the same body fat percentage, same weight, and come from the same mother, so the same genetics to an extent, then why is there a big increase in visceral fat in her? And that is just to do with the lifestyle factors. I work in a profession where I'm walking around 7,000 steps a day on average. My sister is a actuary, so she is working, at a desk for 50, 60 hours a week. Working very hard, and because of that, her NEAT, her NEAT, is a lot lower than mine. There's also differences in muscle mass as well, but the main thing to realise is to do with the amount of actual movement itself. So why the visceral fat response is kind of evolutionary is if we look at the kind of bear attack logic. So this is just a bit of an explanation as to what cortisol is. So if you are in the wild and you have a bear run at you, obviously the first response for you is to run away or to defend yourself. That first kind of hormone release is adrenaline, and after that followed, shortly after that, is cortisol release. Now, what cortisol does after an event like that, after a stressful situation, is it will store fat around your organs to keep you safe and protected from another bear attack, in that sense. The body creates more accessible energy or fat, and stores it where you need it most to protect, which is your vital organs. But the problem is, obviously, we're not in those sort of caveman era times now, but your body does not know the difference between a bear attack and the kind of factors that come with your job. The stressful deadlines, the to-do lists, board presentations, unhappy clients, constant stimulation, poor sleep, etc. Because your body doesn't know the difference between those things, it means that your cortisol is always released, which means it is always high. Beautiful. So yeah, like I said at the bottom, chronic stress equals chronic cortisol, which equals visceral fat increase. So the reason why you aren't able to shift the fat around your stomach, let's go through why this is the case now that we know it's to do with cortisol, but why is your fat always staying there? So there are kind of two mechanisms towards this. The first one is to do with lipoprotein lipase. So cortisol activates LPL, which acts as a vacuum and kind of sucks in free fatty acids in your bloodstream, and puts them into your visceral fat cells. So even if you have the same diet and exercise as someone else, for example, your fat is still going to get redirected to a different storage site, which is your organs. So this is why when you have high cortisol, your fat is stored more centrally. The other one is to do with your alpha-2 receptors. So the alpha-2 receptors are on your visceral fat cells, and when your cortisol is elevated, it triggers these receptors to block fat burning or lipolysis. And that makes the actual fat resistant to being burnt. Okay, so on one hand, you've got cortisol increase, which sucks fat from your blood into your visceral fat. And then again, because the cortisol is increased, it makes that more that turns receptors on, which makes it tricky to be burnt and kind of stops lipolysis. Both those mechanisms will act simultaneously under stress, and it kind of works in a massive feedback loop. So cortisol increases, LPL activation starts, and because there's more visceral fat and more stress, the receptors stop lipolysis, and then you go through this kind of cycle: stress, LPL, lipolysis. So we kind of know how cortisol is kind of pushing visceral fat, or sort of increasing visceral fat and making it harder to get rid of. The other two things that the cortisol can impact for you is insulin resistance and chronic inflammation. Again, both these things also will increase the amount of fat around your organs. Won't go into this one in too much detail, obviously I don't want to make the video too long, but the main thing to know is that elevated insulin creates an environment that opposes lipolysis, and the chronic inflammation basically signals the cytokines in the bloodstream, and they make the fat tissue itself more inflamed and harder to break down. So we have a three-way triangle of cortisol being released, more so because of chronic stress, which means you get insulin resistance, which means you get chronic inflammation, and it all goes round in a cycle. So we have to break the cycle, and that starts with trying to reduce your cortisol. And just bringing you back to the 5 biggest mistakes. So 5 biggest mistakes would be the things that are going to increase either your cortisol more, your insulin resistance more, or your inflammation more. And that is cutting out all carbs is increasing your cortisol and inflammation. Harsh calorie deficit spikes cortisol. Low muscle mass increases inflammation and reduces your insulin sensitivity. Excessive HIIT training, again, increases cortisol, and long duration fast does the same. Join me in part 2 to talk about the things that you should be doing to improve your cortisol levels and in turn get rid of the fat around your stomach more easily for your population, for people who are sat down working at a desk in their 30s, 40s, 50s, based off of my experience of doing DEXA scans.